it's Dave, it's Duncan, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. For this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from experimental hardcore quartet Candy. The band's new album, It's Inside You, will be released on June 7th via Relapse Records. So,
not the thing to say when having sex with your partner. It's a turn off, apparently.
Yeah.
Especially if you had a wee wink at the end. I mean, they don't like that, Dave. Don't do it.
No, I'll take your word for that.
Love lessons from Duncan McLeish.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Edutainment, ladies and gentlemen.
Edutainment.
Candy return with her new album. It's Inside You via Relapse Records, and now I can't stop thinking about it.
Now you're thinking a wee wink at the end of it. Inside You.
A brazen take on hardcore metal.
We know who does PR from this, so she expects it at the start. So let's front load it with things that she can't use in her press statement, and then we'll review the album.
Let's do that. A brazen take on hardcore metal, disparate electronics, and experimental soundscapes.
Desperate lyrics. Love me, please.
It's Inside You sees Candy take another step forward with a compelling, extreme, and one-of-a-kind take on the genre. When Candy were beginning to sketch the contours of their third full length, they sat down
Contour. Nice use. Sorry.
They wrote a list that would serve as their guiding mood. Among the words and phrases, big, fun, holy shit, ridiculous, and blockbuster. That should give you a good idea of what It's Inside You is all about. Their mission was to build upon the world of Candy. In doing so, they focused first and foremost on creating an energizing and empowering atmosphere in which seeking connections with oneself and with others was central. Candy is made up of bandleader and lead guitarist Michael Quick, vocalist and lyricist Zach Quirham, drummer Steve DiGenio, and bassist Drew Stark. In their world-building efforts, the quartet opened it up and invited collaborators like Integrity's Aaron Melnick, Angel Dust's Justice Tripp, and Trash Talk's David Gagliardi, who helped enrich and
David
define,
from that band.
define the band's already distinctive personality. Spurred by an interest in connectivity and the spirit of community, this is the first Candy record with more than one guest feature. It's Inside You is a kind of manifesto of kinship and inner strength. In the past, we've leaned into the nihilistic and sad sides of that, a more negative side of the heaviness. Quirham reflects on this new record, Candy leans into the space where heaviness becomes motivational. It's pure energy for action, transformation, aspiration. It might be a surprising turn of temperament from the boys who brought you a world of shit, but it's part of the point to turn self-isolation into expansion and adrenaline. We really wanted a feeling, says Quick, a good one. The album was produced by Candy and Ben Greenberg at Applehead Studios, and then engineered by Ben Greenberg, mixed by Kurt Ballou at God City Studios, with additional production and mixing by Zach Weeks, and mastered by Brad Boatwright at
Just keep adding the awesome on top of my Jenga tower.
Candy. I was aware of these guys.
Did you not listen to the previous album? Was it just me that listened to that when it came out?
I did listen to the previous album. Yeah,
cool.
I remember when I heard the previous album, I just remember thinking, that artwork is fucking grim. Like, that was the first thing. It was
when we were like, I think we'd not long started doing reviews again, and Relapse were the record label that everything Relapse were announcing. I think it was at that time period they were just like every month they were putting out something. I was like, this is just fucking incredible. I remember like seeing the picture of the album artwork, seeing a picture of the band and going, oh, all right. And then I remember listening to it and going, what are we doing here? Like, none of this goes. Like, it's all wrong. But remember just feeling kind of like dirty when that album finished. It's like a incredibly ugly sounding album. It was like really heavy, really ugly, really nasty. But I dug it.
Yeah. So what did you make of this follow up then?
I think this is almost night and day. I think as much as I loved that previous release, and I thought it was really, really, really good, I think this is fucking incredible. Like, this is... Now, we should put our cards on the table, right?
All right, okay.
Right, the cards are going on the table. I am someone who enjoys music to be a little bit more out there. And when I say out there, I don't mean 19 5-time signature with interlocking jazz sections with horned instruments only. I don't mean that. I mean, what I enjoy is bands that really throw caution to the wind and how they, one, construct their songs, but two, the instrumentation they bring in, those elements that fuse together that on paper probably shouldn't work, but when you hear them, I use this phrase quite a lot, but when you hear it, you're like that. Was I stupid thinking that those would never go together? And now I've heard that I'm like that. Or is the band somehow maniacally in like an underground bunker found the connection? Eureka! I have cracked the code. This album, It's Inside You, wink. It's Inside You reminds me of a more hardcore, more metal Atari Teenage Riot. Yeah. And I was a big fan of Atari Teenage Riot when I was a teenager. Funnily enough, I loved them. They've been gone for a while now, and there's maybe a bit of context needed, but Atari Teenage Riot, who were founded by frontman, multi-instrumentalist Alec Empire, were a German kind of electronic punk dystopian sounding act. Their music always sounded just like it was on the fringes of being listenable. Like always, all to the point where you're like, I could switch this off, but you're just keeping me in. But they mixed tons of electronic samples, glitchy noises, weird effects, and a punk aesthetic to the vocal delivery. And it was all it was politically driven, memory serves. It was all very kind of fuck politics, fuck the government, fuck consumerism, buy an album. There was a lot of that in there, and I dug it. And Candy sound like weirdly a more refined yet punishingly heavier version of that. And first and foremost on this one, I got fun. Like, I could hear the band were having a fucking ball putting this together. And this has elements that will make you sit there and go, has this album jumped to something else? Which I kind of love about it. Like, when you listen to a track like Love Like Snow, which is just like, it's basically dance music, which I kind of love about it. And singier choruses and all the rest. Or like opening track Existence, which must be a reference to the David Cronenberg 1999 film of the same name, with the same X and the small Z in the same place, well, capital Z in the same place, which is about, and it might be a theme for the album, but Existence was a movie about how you could it was kind of just before the Matrix as well, how you could basically plug yourself in and become part of the game. It was before VR and all the rest, but you could become part of that game through organic attachments to your body. And I kind of felt like, as an opening song, that kind of set things up for me, because you are met with everything from game noises to dance music to drum and bass to garage to fucking punishing breakdown riffs. Let's see when this album wants to hit you with a like riff, you're just like, fucking give me, and then the bass drum hymns in the background, and you're just in for a good time. They throw a lot against the wall, right? And I've said this before, some listeners don't like that. Some of the audience don't like that. What they like is, if I'm listening to a death metal album, it's a death metal album. If I'm listening to a hardcore album, it's a hardcore album. Occasionally can bring something in, a little funky riff or something, and I'll let that pass, but I'm not here as a hardcore fan to listen to techno. You know, the two don't meet. Candy just don't seem to have that, and following my ethos of the year, which is like really the rule book for genre, is being ripped up almost week on week now. I'm hearing something around like that. We just don't, there are no lines. The lines were never there. Everything is just fluid. I think this shows a playfulness in the songwriting, but actually a really smart craft on how to use elements and switch them up. Out with maybe one or two songs on here where an element they bring in, which is maybe of a kind of more industrial or electronic bass, for lack of a better word, not bass instrument, but like a bassist in the track, which will go all the way through the song. All the other songs have them as sections that interlock as a build up to like a heavy breakdown section, or coming out of a very heavy like aggro hardcore section as well. I think that's really smart, because those switches up make the tracks, one, far more memorable in a genre which, let's be honest, has a tendency to be relatively forgettable, but the execution of it and the way they connect them in, to me, just shows really good songwriting.
Yeah.
It's gimmicky at times, and there's no getting around that. There are certain sections in here where, like, by the time you get to tracks like Hypercore, which closes this out, I'm listening to certain bits and I'm like, right, this does kind of feel like you're utilising a gimmick in your song. But actually, if you remove yourself from the mindset where you think that the band are just trying to be silly for the sake of being silly, or experimental for being experimental, I actually think what you'll find is a smart use in the composition of the tracks. So, like, the front half of the album, which we're going to get to this in a little second, but the front half of the album is predominantly where the guest appearances are. It's also the bit where tracks will go wildly different, and that, I think, is in part to kind of, one, it's to do with the vocalists that are on there, but two, I think it's kind of front-loaded in such a way where you get past that level, when you get into Dehumanize Me, the album kind of just hits a, right, this is, you've set all the templates out here, all what we're trying to do is there, and now get ready for the back half of the album, where we're going to refine a lot of what you've heard before, focus it down and get heavier. Like, the back half of this album is heavier than the front half of this album. By the way, the front half of this album is heavy. And like, when the album finished, like, for the first time through, the phrase that came to mind was "fuck my tits." I, like, genuinely was just like, and I've listened to a lot of, like, heavy, weird, strange, eclectic shit this year, and this is not the most eclectic thing out there, but there's just an intensity on the way they deliver it that when I got to the end of it, I was just like, a couple of days later, came back down, switched it on again, got through it a second time, big sigh came again. It's not because I wasn't enjoying it, I just felt it was so, it's 30 minutes long, and I just felt like, you've just given me the world, and I don't know if I'm ready for the world. I'd much rather just stick to a continent. But about listen 4 or 5, I'd really acclimated to a lot of the switch-ups, and that's when I really started to think overall that I think Candy is much more interesting in this lane than the previous. Now, I know they have stuff before that. I haven't heard that. My introduction to them is when they went on the Relapse. And comparing this one to the previous album, I just find this one much more interesting and much more memorable. I also think we might just still be scratching the surface of what this band can deliver, because I found that every time they added a new element in, I kind of felt like, that's really interesting. I'd love to see what would happen if they explored that more.
Yeah.
And that's maybe my biggest gripe overall, is some of those switch-ups are really satisfying when you listen to them, but there's also part of me that's like, you could have just done a whole song of that, and it would have worked. It would have really worked. And the inclination to throw in that big, chunky, heavy closing riff, I understand why it's there. I understand why you're doing it. Maybe your listeners are still coming along the journey, and you're educating them through these songs as to, we don't need to do this in every track, lads. But I found myself just loving it more and more as it went on. I don't think it's the best that Candy have to offer yet. I actually still think we're going to get that. But this hits me in so many sweet spots that I think this is right up there. I genuinely had so much fun with this. It sounds remarkably different than a lot of the stuff you're going to hear this year. I think they utilise it in a very smart way. If I was them, my only advice, and I'm in no position to give advice at all, they're signed, they've got albums out, I'm talking about them, like, on YouTube. If I was them, I would say, that go big or go home attitude could go a little bit bigger. I think at points, I think they could throw caution further against the wind, and the rewards will be there. I think there's such an interesting album, such an interesting band who have released such an interesting album. Might not be perfect. Seldom albums are, but like, man, when this connects, I couldn't stop like headbanging and smiling. Like, some of the riffs in this are I want to see them live. I know they've been over. I want to see them come over again. I was hearing them, I was just like that. You have a fucking crowd of people fucking fist bumping in there, getting ready to tear shit up. It's fucking great.
Yeah.
So really fucking enjoyed this one. Last thing, you mentioned production. I know there's a lot of different people in it. Production is fucking great. I like this. Is like, it's sharp, it's punchy, it's like that snare drum is just it's behind my eye, just fucking poking me. Loved that. Absolutely loved that. And vocally, because I'm a vocalist, I love to throw that in. I think this is better sounding than the previous release. I think it just sounds more focused, more confident, and more in control. So yeah, this is fucking great.
Nice.
How about you, Dave? I know sometimes bands can go a wee bit weird, and you like that wee bit weird streak, and this band certainly went a wee bit weird. Were you along for the ride?
I was. I mean, when I heard the last album, I was kind of thinking, these guys sound like they're on the verge of something, quite exciting, and it's something a bit different within hardcore. I enjoyed the fact that they weren't afraid to kind of experiment and push the envelope a little bit to make them stand out a bit more. That last album, I mean, it predominantly sat within the hardcore side of things, but they did, they sprinkled in a few other elements like industrial and electronica and bits of noise and stuff like that, to kind of take it beyond the kind of the scope of a standard hardcore album. I feel like with It's Inside You, those boundaries have been pushed much, much more. They've leaned in to those more experimental elements and kind of widened the kind of range of dynamics on this new release. But the first thing that did hit me on this album was the production. The production is savage. Like, it's got that like really kind of nasty, powerful kind of hardcore stomp to it, where every riff and every groove just kind of punches a hole in you. But there's a clarity to this album that Heaven Is Here didn't have. It was definitely a kind of grainier sounding album, whereas It's Inside You feels cleaner, but without losing any of that power. Kurt Ballou is also involved, so yeah.
There may be a little bit of the reason why.
You're never going to go wrong there. As for the album, I agree. I think this is a far more fascinating listen than anything Candy have done in the past, and there's so much to enjoy. Like, this is a real kind of like feast of kind of audible delights that you want to come back to time and time again. I love the way they've incorporated the electronics on this one. It just feels so much more conducive to the album as a whole. Like, rather than having just like small bursts of it, the way they've kind of woven it through this album, it feels more integral to the kind of flow and the tone of the album. Even the way they have connected a lot of the tracks together using electronic outros and glitchy samples at the beginning of some tracks. It reminded me of a little bit of Code Orange's Underneath at times, not in like we're trying to emulate it type way, but more just in the kind of technique of things. I actually think Candy use a much wider range of sounds and ideas than Code Orange.
Oh, 100%.
They're firing everything into this, from glitch electronics to industrial drum and bass. There's a bit of DJ scratching. There's like gothic kind of like synths on it, plus loads of like noise and atmospherics in the background. And I think that atmosphere is something they really utilize really well on this release. The dynamics are really cleverly used to kind of build parts up. And when they do go all in on it, like Love Like Snow, it sounds huge.
Right, those melodic vocals in the background, which is one of the guests on the track, and like when you hear that, it's maybe another tiny complaint I could have done with like another track where there's something like that in there, because it broke the album. It made it sound fucking monstrously huge.
Yeah, I agree. But even when they pushed something heavier, there still felt like there was a bit of that kind of atmosphere in the background, so it never really leaves the album. I also think there's a bit more of an emotional kind of rawness to this album that I don't think they've ever really exposed as much of previously. Certainly vocally, I felt that vocally it felt more kind of honest in the delivery, and also lyrically as well. I think having guests like Justice, Trip, or Mercy, I think really helped kind of elevate it. Those like additional textures and ranges gave the album more diversity on that front. I agree with you. I think a bit more, maybe a little bit more clean somewhere else would have been really nice. And then you've also got David from Trash Talk adding in some guitars on the title track, which was really cool. Like that, I loved that kind of echoey lead work. It was very, very Cro-Mags-esque, but I love that. I love Cro-Mags. Out with the electronica and the glitch and the industrial and all that, I was kind of glad to hear that they haven't sacrificed what they're great at as well, which is just big, nasty, fuck off, hardcore riffs. And this album is just packed with them. Like, nearly every track has a riff that you're just going to go, oh, fucking hell. It's got that, like, you know, that almost kind of like Knocked Loose meets kind of Code Orange kind of type groove to it that, you know, it gets you hooked in instantly. The stomp on You Will Never Get Me, loved that. Like, just really brutal sounding. I really like the different kind of vocal screaming textures, I suppose, that they used as well. Like, it almost kind of differentiated each part of the song, which was cool. But yeah, the album is very varied. Like, it never becomes too repetitive. Like, there's parts where you're like, tracks like Terror Management, for example, that goes like more into like grindcore territory.
Oh, it's fucking blastastic.
Yeah, it's like kind of full of hell type vibe to it. It's got, you know, blasts and frantic riffs. There's some kind of blackened tones in there as well, loads of switch ups. But then like Silent Collapse goes like traditional old school hardcore punk as well. Like, when I was listening, I was like, this would sound like it should be on the Green Room soundtrack or something like that. You know, it's got that kind of like intensity to it. The final 2 tracks is, you know, where it starts to get a bit kind of wild. Like, and if you've listened to Candy before, you'll know they tend to go a bit kind of more off the rails at the end of their albums. And this is no different. Dancing to the Infinite Beat goes like all out fucking electronicore, 90s techno, drums, electronics, and then hypercore continues with that kind of heavily electronic drums and sounds, again switching between kind of like drum and bass and techno. But what they do a little bit differently on the last one is they start to incorporate like a kind of very kind of heavy hardcore riffs, but still with that kind of electronic back in there. There are some normal drums in there as well, but the electronics are the kind of dominating kind of component of the track. But it works. Like, it feels more in line with the kind of DNA of the previous track. So it feels like it kind of works as an album closer. I think this could be the best thing Candy have released to date, to be honest. I love that every release from them is a little bit more twisted and a little bit more evolved. I think this is definitely the most interesting release in terms of the components and the arrangements and even the kind of ratio of elements I've used, and that the production is straight up fire. Love the sound of this album. So what do we think score-wise for Candy's new album? What are you thinking?
I'm coming in at a 4.5. Like I say, I think they're on the precipice. I really, really do. I would love, like, if you put a gun against my head right now and said, what's the next Candy album going to sound like? I don't know. And that's kind of exciting. I want that from my music. I don't want to be like, oh, it's going to sound like Rain and Blood for the next 10 years. I kind of want that, you know, that there's something about them that's, I think we're scratching the surface of their creativity. And I think everything they've done, all the elements that are on here, there isn't one thing which I think is ill-placed, which is very, very difficult when you consider the amount of elements they brought into this album. So whilst it's not the 5 I was hoping to give them, 4.5, I cannot wait to see the people that get to find out the band exists from this album, because you're in for a wild fucking ride.
Yep, for sure. I'd agree. A 4.5, same for me. I think this is fantastic. They sound even more confident in their skills on this one than they've ever sounded. But I agree. I think they've got more in them. I think there's another level to come from Candy. They seem to sound even more kind of unique and individual on each release, and I think the more they push that envelope, the more unique they're going to be, and the more impressive the releases will get as well. They're
on the right label as well.
100%.
Yeah, like this is the label to push that and allow them the freedom to explore those areas.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking, when you think of that roster of bands that Relapse have, but you also think of, like, will that sound just continually changing and expanding out? Candy could sit on numerous tours comfortably, and bridge huge gaps between. Like, I was dream booking like tours in my head while listening to it. I'm like, that I could fucking. Like, I just think I think they're about to become huge. Like, I genuinely do, and I'm tough for them.
Nice. Candy, It's Inside You, out on June 7th on Relapse Records. Links below at the band to the pre-order. Check it out, have a listen, see what you think. That is the review. Thank you for checking it out, much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, and it's inside you.